Independent thoughts, independent life. This is Chad Benson.
This is the Chad Benson Show. My name is Craig Collins, hanging out, filling in with you today. Chad is back tomorrow. Real quick, just mentioned for my producer, I can hear myself bouncing. There it is. Okay, perfect. I have Terry Crews sitting in wait because there's a lot of things going on in the world today. There's a lot of things that have been going on in the world for quite some time. And now there's a debate back and forth as to who are the right people to talk about those things. I have Herschel Walker audio, too. Terry Crews, Herschel Walker, famous black people, famous black men who have opinions. One opinion, which Terry Crews shared with Don Lemon. Don Lemon is always a fun guy. It's fun to, yes, I said fun guy, to hear and watch his show every so often. But this is getting covered a lot, and this is just a clip from that conversation. And I'm going to play a lot of it. I'm going to give you about a minute and 40 or so of it. I might jump in a few times. But this is Don Lemon, Terry Crews talking about Black Lives Matter, the movement, the protests, the violence that happens in a lot of our communities right now that's tied to a lot of different things. It's sort of a surreal conversation. And just honestly, as you're even reading, say you go on something like Twitter to look at the reactions to this, and it's there's a lot, to say the very least. But let me give you some context. Let's hear some of this.
Terry, I became sick. If I told you to wear a mask,
Terry,
they want to kick you out.
You're a high-profile person. You're writing things out there. You know you're going to get backlash. You know people are going to respond to what you're saying on Twitter. So I don't think you should be surprised by that. I have a skin as tough as an armadillo because of what I do, and I think maybe you should adapt that. But here's what I have to say.
I am surprised that that's part of the argument, too, is that Don Lemon starts off, Terry is complaining a little bit, or at least just informing people that he's been getting ridiculed for his stances on some of the issues that are taking place right now. He's getting ripped apart on social media because he doesn't agree with the majority on the ways in which things should happen. He doesn't agree in the defund police movement, per se. There's a lot of things that Terry Crews, famous actor, feels maybe right now the mob mentality is getting wrong. And when I say that, what I mean by that is the Twitter, the social media mentality, more so than anything else. But let's hear a little bit, because even then, as Terry was trying to say a little more of what he thought, you could hear Don interrupting just quite a bit. But go ahead, Don Lemon.
The Black Lives Matter movement was started because it was talking about police brutality. If you want an all Black Lives Matter movement that talks about gun violence in communities, including, black communities, then start that movement with that name. But that's not what Black Lives Matter is about. It's not an all-encompassing. So if you're talking about, if someone started a movement that said, cancer matters, and then someone comes in and says, why aren't you talking about HIV? It's not the same thing. We're talking about cancer. So the Black Lives Matter movement is about police brutality and injustice in that manner, not about what's happening in black neighborhoods. There are people who are working on that issue. And if you want to start that issue, why don't you start it?
I should let Terry Crews respond to that. But after playing all that and hearing all that, it's surprising to me, and maybe to you, and maybe to a lot of people, that the stance that Don Lemon would take is that the Black Lives Matter movement and the thought behind that movement is to protect black lives when it comes to their interactions just with police officers, not in general, not in communities like Chicago where shootings happen on a daily, weekly basis, where there was a lot over the last weekend. And actually, I have a Chicago pastor that I might play for you later on in the show. The only black lives that are focused on during the Black Lives Matter movement and protesting are the ones that are being taken by police officers, specifically white police officers. I don't know that everybody who's a protester for Black Lives Matter would understand that concept or believe that that's all they're standing for. I would assume the people in Chicago who go out and rally and peacefully protest for things like Black Lives Matter would assume they mean all black lives that are being taken from any sort of violence, anything that's wrong, and not specific one. That's a very odd take for me, and I think for a lot of people. But let's continue with Terry Crews' response.
Do you understand what I'm saying?
But when you look at the organization, police brutality is not the only thing they're talking about.
I know that. I agree, but that's not what the Black Lives Matter movement is about.
I don't understand that part right there. Terry says when you look at the organization, that's not all they talk about. Don says, yes, you're right, but that's not what they mean. they're talking about that, but that's not. They don't mean that because this hurts my argument right now. Go ahead,
Terry. Black Lives Matter is about police brutality and about criminal justice. It's not about what happens in communities when it comes to crime, black on black crime. People who live near each other, black people, kill each other. Same as whites. 80-some% of white people are killed by white people because of proximity.
Very true.
It's the same thing with black people. That happens in every single neighborhood. But that doesn't, again, I'm not saying that's not important that those kids died, but it's
I don't know if they were having an audio problem with Terry Crews there, but he can't get anything in. He can't seem to say anything. I just pulled this audio right before the show, and it said that Terry Crews and Don Lemon discuss. But that was a lot of Don Lemon discussing without a lot of Terry Crews. Maybe we'll have more of Terry in just a bit today. But it is, there's a scary take in that. And I'm a 30-something white guy, so I get uncomfortable sometimes throwing my opinion out there. Not that I should. Everyone's opinion is as valid as anybody else's as far as opinions go. I can certainly have thoughts and express them, and I'm here on a radio show, so I think that's the expectation. But I still, the pit of my stomach gets a little nervous as I go down these roads, and yet I can't fathom anybody that I know, that I lived in Chicago for a long time, that I've encountered that would believe what Don Lemon just said a second ago, that if you're a person who supports change in our society because you feel a community, a minority community, specifically in this case, black lives, that they matter, if you believe just that sentiment and you don't actually, become part of the organization that has a lot more problems, as has been pointed out by a lot of people, well beyond just the simple sentiments that statement, that those three letters seem to note. I would be surprised that a lot of people believe with Don Lemon that we don't mean all of them. We don't mean all of the black lives that are lost. It's such an uncomfortable and odd thing to even try to wrap my brain around. That because there's so much debate as to other things. There's so many people that say, well, you said all lives matter. That's not the conversation we're having right now. It's a conversation about something else. But Don Lemon just he specified the group even further. And I've never heard that take before. I don't know if you have. And again, I'd love to hear from you. Since I'm doing it, since this is, I guess, how we kick off the show, I'm going to have audio of another debate that happened on the television. We had Terry Crews and Don Lemon face off, although our audio so far has just represented Don Lemon going solo. We also had this from Fox. Greg Gutfeld just went off yesterday on the 5. This conversation was interesting, and I have to play a bit of it for context for you because I want you to hear the question he's asked, his response to it, and then the segment ends with Greg still yelling as they go to a commercial. If you missed this, I was entertained by this just in the amount of fight that can happen in just a quick few seconds on television today. But here's part of that.
The White House Chief of Staff is now encouraging people to wear masks, and apparently there are going to be masks available at the Trump event in New Hampshire this weekend. But remember, there were no masks seen, really, in Tucson or Tulsa.
That's actually how he starts setting up the conversation, which to me, right there, I've already, I don't know. When you hear a one-sided question, when you hear things that seem to be leading, I wonder if you sometimes tune out like I do. But let's continue.
Greg, I was wondering about the political strategy here. How does the strategy of normalizing the coronavirus help the Trump campaign? I mean, obviously, people are dying. This is no common cold, and I think that's evident to everybody.
Before I let Greg respond, I want you to think that you were just asked that question like that and how you'd field it, because there are some difficulties in the amount of things that are assumed in that sentence, that anybody is normalizing COVID-19, normalizing any virus, and just saying it's completely fine if every single person on the planet get it. That's essentially what normalizing means here. And I don't think anybody said that. There is debate as to how risky it is for people of certain age groups and people without any risk factors. But there's certainly no debate that everyone is taking it seriously, especially when you think about people that are most at risk. Here's how Greg responded.
That's the craziest question you've ever done. Nobody's normalizing a virus, okay? But by the way, no one should take anybody in the media seriously in their questioning of process if they haven't actually made a correct piece of advice, okay? Let's face it. Number one, they politicized hydroxy. Remember that? They were so happy to find that one bad study that said it didn't work. Now they go strangely silent when you hear that it might work. And in fact, we all kind of knew that it might work. In terms of a strategy, it was It was well tolerated among people. We knew that there was promise, but the media didn't like that. 2, the rest home deaths. The media bent over backward to cover up for the Cuomos, right? They didn't want that to be a big story, but that was a big story, okay? So they covered up the rest home stuff. They bashed a drug that had potential. They refused to cite the most important data on Earth, which is the reduction in death rates. That is the important thing. But you can't talk about the fact that that's plummeting. And then let's not forget the travel ban, right?
Oh, my God. This just keeps going. It keeps going and going. And he's so angry. Let's hear how this ends, though, because eventually he says, he completes his thought. And this is the way that happens.
Well, I think there are more than 125,000 dead. Next up, Joe Biden is promising
really? I didn't know that
to transform the nation. We're going to talk about that next on the...
I laugh because of how angry Greg gets at that response that Juan says what he does about the death toll, which is a scary number. Look, I think everybody understands a scary number, and that also is not necessarily part of the argument that Greg was trying to make on Fox. He was trying to say how media constantly, and he's doing it from a position of media. I get that. I always find that funny, but he's not wrong. Has picked and chosen which conversations to have, how to navigate any and all stories in a way that does not make sense. And that on top of the fact that you have Don Lemon interviewing Terry Crews, and Don Lemon is recategorizing what I think is not at all the message from even the movement of those who support peaceful protesting for Black Lives Matter. It's just surreal. The whole thing is surreal. But the fact that he got so mad, especially at the end, because Greg's yelling through the commercial. They actually go to commercial, and he just keeps yelling.
The nation. We're going to talk about that next on The Five.
They had to mute the guy. You got to mute a guy on a live TV show because he's filming. I wonder what he did. I wish that they had kept a little box of him during the commercial break because when they do the five, they have everybody in their own little corner. I wish they had kept him up because he's probably running around throwing stuff. I imagine he was very upset. And truthfully, and more honestly, maybe what I find so interesting about that conversation, about both conversations that happened today, and about all the things going on in the world right now. There's a lot of numbers I might get to later on that really demonstrate the world in which we live right now and the difference in understanding maybe our health risks and other things on almost a daily basis. But we can't have conversations, man. We just can't. We can't do it. It seems like if you disagree with someone, people are incapable. I don't care if you're on television or if you're sitting in your living room and you try to talk to someone that you know disagrees with something, or you go out somewhere if you're allowed. Everything we do, every conversation we have, it's impossible for it to not end like that. And I wish that maybe this would be great if in real life we could all institute the commercial break. If every single one of us halfway through the conversation, when you know that it's not going anywhere, I wish you could all throw to a commercial of some kind because it might make it easier to switch on to the next topic. Because by the time they get back, they're all fine. Greg's had his moment. But again, Fox, if you're listening, and I know the president at times has said we should stop watching Fox News, but a real winner, a real concept to put on your television stations moving forward is to add that the person who's most angry during an argument, add their box during the commercial break, just in the corner, just so we can see how they're calming down, how they're cooling off after a fun segment, and maybe even have just a second one of whoever they're arguing with. That might be fun to see Juan too. All right, the Craig Collins with a Chad Benson show. Craig Collins filling in. Quick break. A lot more in just a bit.
Warning, no snowflake zone. Uninformed opinions are in danger of melting. The Chad Benson Show.
This is the Chad Benson Show. My name is Craig Collins. I find it tremendously interesting that Laura Ingraham and Mike Pompeo would talk about TikTok. I just find it interesting. Not that it's actually wrong. It's actually kind of, we should all be a little bit weary, a lot weary, and maybe we should do what some other countries have done. We should ban TikTok because of what it actually is, which we're, I guess, coming to more and more of a consensus on. It's definitely an app that China is using to spy on us. So this is the conversation. And again, I react first to the fact that they're even covering it because up until a few weeks ago, I think a lot of people thought TikTok was an app that kids use to trade videos, and that's just silly videos that they're putting out for everybody to see and nothing more. And it's never that easy. If China creates something, if a Chinese company's behind it, it's a lot scarier than probably it should be. But here, this is the ultimate version of TikTok being recognized on a national scale? Laura Ingraham and Mike Pompeo discuss.
We're taking this very seriously. We're certainly looking at it. We've worked on this very issue for a long time, whether it was the problems of having Huawei technology in your infrastructure. We've gone all over the world, and we're making real progress getting that out. We declared ZTE a danger to American national security. We've done all of these things with respect to Chinese apps on people's cell phones. I can assure you the United States will get this one right too, Laura. I don't want to get out in front of the president, but it's something we're looking at.
Would you recommend that people download that app on their phones tonight, tomorrow, anytime currently?
Only if you want your private information in the hands of the Chinese Communist Party.
That is a heck of a sentence. Let me play that again. Should you download TikTok? Should your kids have TikTok on their phone? Is that something that you want right now or in the future? Although I guess if it's already on a bunch of phones, and it certainly is, it's one of the most popular apps used right now. But if you do that, this is what Mike thinks about that.
Only if you want your private information in the hands of the Chinese Communist Party.
That is a heck of a sentence. I imagine then if that's something that our intelligence is all telling us is absolutely true, then I would tell you for sure from this moment moving forward that it's something that will inevitably be banned. I can't see our country allowing it to continue to exist. I just can't. I can't have that happen. I don't think it makes any sense, and I doubt that they'll think it makes any sense because China is not a country. This is the silliest of statements, and yet every time that you started to see people defend China over some of the things that were being said specific to coronavirus, and then pundits would start to sound as if China wasn't all that bad, their government wasn't all that bad, and they are. The Chinese government is utterly untrustworthy in a lot of senses, to say the very least. A case in point, the fact that we're now all afraid that TikTok is somehow a spying app. But I just can't imagine anyone. I wonder, though, if there's going to be some sort of sentiment here, some sort of criticism of the president or whoever it is, that this is somehow racist. Much like the travel ban, if this happens, if you start en masse trying to ban a lot of apps that are created in China by Chinese companies that probably are providing that information to their government, I wonder. I truthfully wonder how that gets perceived by media. And I wonder what Greg Gutfeld will say about it, because he'll go crazy. I love it sometimes when he goes crazy. All right. I'm thrilled to fill in with you guys today. Chad Benson is back, as I said. He's coming back tomorrow, so it's my last day filling in. Got a lot to talk about. There's a lot of things going on. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, though, coming up in a bit.
Chad Benson Show.
Independent thoughts, independent life. This is Chad Benson.
This is the Chad Benson Show. My name is Craig Collins. Been thrilled to fill in. Chad had an extended weekend, but he will be back tomorrow. So this is my last day with you. I'm going to start off by talking about Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, comments he made, I believe, yesterday. These comments, I guess, to some are very controversial. To some people, this is the same gaslighting that the president has been accused of participating in time and again. And these are about COVID-19. Governor DeSantis was asked about his maybe in some ways, I guess the way some can categorize it, I wouldn't say it this way, but his indifference to or thought that some people might not be at risk that much if they get it. They might not be in as serious might not have as serious of an illness, might not wind up getting hospitalized. There's a lot of things that we now know about the coronavirus that we didn't know, say, when we closed down most of the country just a few months ago. So here is Governor DeSantis in yet another piece of audio that so many people on the social medias and so many talking heads are saying is just it's problematic. Here's the problematic stuff.
No. I'm not minimizing it, but I think we should also have proper perspective. When we went into this, there were people saying that 20-year-old was just as at risk as a 90-year-old, and that's just not factually true. We know where the risk is. We know who the comorbidities that are impacted. We've got data on this now. We know who the folks who are more vulnerable, who need to be protected. So it's a very serious thing, and I don't think he was trying to minimize it, but I mean, clearly we viewed it as serious from the beginning in January when we were monitoring it. But at the same time, when you hear news about cases, I just think that should be put in the proper context and perspective that the number one age for cases in Florida is 21. And if you're 21 and you don't have significant comorbidities, your fatality rate is pretty much zero with that.
That is a fact. That is a fact that he shares. And right now, for whatever reason, and I think I'll say that I think there's some logic in the amount of fear that exists. And the reason that that's logical is, one, that there are people that have died. There's over 100,000 people that have lost their lives to COVID-19. And are they all people with comorbidities and all people that are elderly or in significant at-risk groups? No. There are people who science right now can't truly understand why a case goes a certain way. There's a bunch of stories I saw over the last few days prepping for this very program that say all kinds of things like the potential for brain damage to exist now with COVID-19. So the way in which we talk about and cover this topic makes the fear of this topic more rational. It just does. If you hear every single day from everyone that says anything about this topic, that these are all the scary, dangerous, and maybe most potentially bad things we can possibly find about this issue, and those are the only things we report to you, then of course what your decision is going to be as far as COVID-19 is concerned is to advocate for things like shutting down your economy and not going outside. But that's just simply not the entirety of the conversation. And a lot of people are trying to point that out, that right now, for whatever reason, and actually I think I have audio from over the weekend too, of a couple different people citing the fact that there were a lot of peaceful protests, a lot of organizing of young people, and now young people are the ones who are coming down with COVID-19 in mass numbers. And the amount of time it usually takes from when you first get COVID-19 to when you potentially test positive for it is about 1 to 2 weeks. So if the protesting started about a couple weeks ago, which is fairly accurate as to when that happened, and a lot of people in the groups that you would have seen at those protests are the people who might wind up being sick. It's hard to say that there's no connection between those two things. It's hard to assume, and it's not really being covered at all by the news. That's the other thing that's sort of jarring to me, is that if you turn on most television stations right now, you will be capable within minutes, if they're talking about news of any kind, of hearing how scary and deadly COVID-19 is. But you'll hear almost no one say that maybe there was a connection to the peaceful protesting and maybe it was not the best of ideas to organize in masses in situations like that and, not necessarily protect yourselves, which is something that did happen. And yet, at the same time, you're also going to hear anytime and everywhere it's ever discussed that if President Trump holds a rally to organize his supporters for the many movements that obviously he has created through his presidency, that's totally wrong. That's completely inappropriate and bad. And yet I believe very much, I want to say this because I'm worried about how this could possibly be taken. I believe very much in everyone's ability to protest any and all issues, to peacefully do it, of course. That is an American right. So I'm not telling you what to do or what not to do if you're someone who listens and goes, no, man, he's trying to stop us from what we want to do. But did it increase the risks of the people that were walking around together, strangers, of getting COVID-19? Yeah, of course it did. That any health professional would tell you that. And now we have cases jumping. We have, in some places, like in Texas, worry that hospital beds are starting to be less available, which is certainly, I think, the biggest actual concern that we should have on this. It's not necessarily if a lot of young people get COVID-19 that potentially we're going to see a huge uptick in the percentage of people that lose their lives to that illness. In those age groups, we certainly are seeing the opposite, a huge decline in the amount of loss of life. But the bigger thing to worry about at any time is the fact that hospitals can't handle the capacity, can't handle the amount of people that would be coming in with illness. And yet, even to some extent, that's not really the topic of conversation either. The only number that anyone references to you, if they do, in my opinion, in some ways just want to scare you, is the amount of cases, which is higher than it's ever been on a day-to-day basis in our country. They won't mention the testing. They won't mention the people getting sick. And they won't mention the death rate, as you've heard a couple times early on in the show. It's kind of crazy. In other news, though, and this maybe just demonstrates the if nothing else, the ability for this virus to spread very quickly. The transmissibility, I think, is what I was looking for. This virus. Atlanta Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms has COVID-19, tested positive for it recently. Her husband sounds like he did as well. She gave an interview last night on TV right after tweeting about it, and she confirmed that she does have coronavirus.
I'm processing all of this. I just received my results. My husband literally has been sleeping since Thursday, which is just not like him. So I decided that we should all get tested. Again, we were tested about 2 weeks ago. We were all negative. And our results came back positive today. And it's a shock because what I've seen with him is not out of the ordinary for seasonal allergies, which are just about year-round allergies in Atlanta.
Okay, I have to react to the first half of what she's talking about. And look, I know this is one case, a high-profile case, because it's not, just a person in a community. It's the mayor of Atlanta, someone who's been on TV a lot, someone who finally started to admonish the amount of violence that exists in Atlanta because of the death of an 8-year-old. An 8-year-old was killed in a shooting during what was definitely not a peaceful protest. And finally, the mayor has turned her opinion a bit to say that these sort of things have to stop. Beyond that, though, what I also find interesting is the way she describes her husband's illness. She describes it as no different than a seasonal allergy to a large extent. Maybe the sleeping is interesting, but anyone ever who said something to that effect and not used a factual case as part of it, they've said, for some people, this is akin to something like, and I don't even think people say seasonal allergies. They usually say flu. They are attacked resoundingly for any time that they offer that opinion. But she's saying what she's experiencing, and certainly since she's someone that's a lot woker than the people that get attacked all the time, that's not going to get criticized here. Let's hear a little bit more from her, because I think what's tremendously interesting too in this conversation is they both point out, the interviewer and Keisha, that they did everything that they were told to do. They wore masks. They socially distanced themselves. They did everything, and the family still got COVID-19 and doesn't really understand why. And the only reason really to bring that up or even try to make a point about it, because I feel like, in a way, just saying that out loud is almost fear-mongering. But truthfully, it might undercut some of what we're told as to ways in which we think we can prevent this. And if that's true, look, if we're in a world where you can't really prevent COVID-19 no matter what you do, and a lot of young people, especially young people who get it, will wind up being okay, there is then more to the argument that maybe some of the things we did to our economy and to our financial world were not necessarily helpful. Because if these can happen, if you remember in New York, I remember when Cuomo used to take the stand every day in New York and sometimes would say, yes, these people are now ill with COVID-19, and some of them were following everything. They were staying at home, social distancing. We don't know how they got it. That was a sentiment he offered multiple times, and it is one now that Atlanta Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms is offering in response to her positive test. The MLB has had several positive tests. The Golf PGA Tour had one. Well, they were doing everything they could to avoid it. So it gets confusing at times when you hear factual stories about people who can't seem to prevent it while following the steps that they're being told to follow. And then you keep getting told to follow those steps. But we have more and more stories emerging where it doesn't work. And I still believe in wearing masks. I do. Personally, I do. I know that a lot more Republicans are coming across on that idea, a lot more high-profile ones, including Mitch McConnell is one that's talked about it often. But I believe in that more than any other reason because it helps keep the economy open. If you can answer a question with something easier than the opposite, to me, that's always going to be more beneficial. If someone says, hey, I got to close the economy unless you wear this mask, I will always say, okay, fine. I'll just throw the mask on and we keep that economy open. As long as, of course, we don't understand that the illness and the risk is scary in other ways than it maybe is right now. Honestly, the death rate is a huge thing to continue to point out. But let's get a little bit more of that audio because just the fact that they kind of admit this is very interesting to me.
You can possibly we wear a mask. We're very thoughtful about washing our hands. I have no idea when and where we were exposed.
And how are you feeling and how is your husband feeling?
Well, like I said, he's been sleeping a lot. That really has been the only unusual thing about him. I feel fine. I suffer from allergies. So aside from just a mild cough and a headache, and it's been a lot going on in our city, so enough to give you a headache. I've not had.
That is an understatement from Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms that there's been enough going on in our city to get a headache. But the way she describes it, and hopefully it doesn't get worse for them, there are people that are pre-symptomatic that wind up getting sicker. But knock on wood that they're not two of those individuals, that her and her husband will be okay. And then you start to wonder if that's a factual case that exists in a high-profile one, if a lot of the athletes who are getting it wind up having mild symptoms, although there are some reports that at least one or two baseball players that have it are struggling with a more serious version of the illness, which I think might put the season in jeopardy in its entirety. And even Mike Trout, I think, has come across recently as saying, obviously the biggest star in baseball, that he's still not totally comfortable with the idea of playing baseball. But you hear stories like this, you hear things all over the place, and then you watch the president take a stage and say something similar to what this experience described to us is, and he's accused of being a crazy human and a person who's disagreeing with every health expert that exists in the world. And I don't know. It's just at times, and even if you don't like the guy, you gotta start to admit when things that he says are not necessarily as inaccurate as everyone reports them being. This is the Chad Benson Show. My name is Craig Collins. Let's see if we can talk about something a little bit more fun after this.
I can't take it anymore!
Well, get over it. It's time to forge a new path with your very own political cartographer, Chad.
This is the Chad Benson Show. My name is Craig Collins. I just found on Twitter that there's a hashtag that's trending, RIP Ellen, I think for Ellen DeGeneres. I don't think she's actually passed away. I think that cancel culture has just finally taken her down, or at least they feel like they have, because they've killed her off. I will figure more out about that in just a bit. I don't understand, though. RIP Ellen, why it's... the New York Post. It's going to answer that question for me in a second. Before I get to that, though, I wanted to mention this. I saw that most drinking that happened during the pandemic, during quarantine, and even still, there was an activity of choice. We all chose to partake in while drinking, and it's not several that I expected, actually. The number one activity, 93% of people who drank between March and now said they did it while watching TV. They sat on their couch, they popped open a cold one, and they watched some sort of television program. Hopefully, I assume it wasn't just news. Although every time you probably watched the news over the last few months, you definitely desired to drink. That was number one. Number two was a Zoom call. And I guess these were more common for just hanging out with friends and having like virtual parties. But I do wonder if maybe depending on your work day and if it's a work meeting of some kind or the boss has a different piece of advice for you than you're ready for, just crack open a little bit to drink there. Number three was, well, you were hanging out with people, which I don't know how that happened at times, but certainly now it makes sense. While cooking or eating, just in general, you get a drink while you're preparing food. I love doing that. That's I don't like cooking a lot. My wife is a tremendously better cook than me. She's born and raised in Mexico, lived in the United States for a while now, of course, and she makes a lot of really great food from her country, a lot of really great food from my country. I am Italian as well as American, I always tell her, so sometimes she even throws an Italian dish in there, and it's fantastic. But whenever I have to cook, I definitely drink during it because we know it's not going to turn out well. But I assume it's just kind of like a comedian. My cooking is like comedy at an improv shop where people aren't very talented yet. It's better if you drink. That's what I should say going in. Maybe that's what I tell her all the time. Number 5 on that list is to celebrate a special occasion of some kind. 43% of people wound up drinking. All right, why the heck is RIP Ellen trending on Twitter? Ellen DeGeneres has been the victim of a death hoax, I guess, that's gone viral. But this is also in response to what has been a continued call for people to cancel her, which again is a storyline I didn't expect in 2020. That's not one. There's a lot that I wouldn't have anticipated would happen this year, but this is certainly one of those. But I guess she's just a mean person. There were rumors a few weeks ago that the Ellen DeGeneres show might get axed completely, that it might be completely done because of the horrible things that have been found out about a woman who's been famous for a large majority of her career, that apparently she's not the nice, happy, kind person you see on television. And there were a lot, I guess, of staff members and people that wound up calling her out for it over time. Now there's a bunch of memes popping up with pictures of other celebrities and or I guess even Justin Bieber, apparently, in some, saying that it's the last photo of Ellen and that she is no longer with us. But that is not accurate. Again, I want to say that since it's trending on social media, I want to add that statement that she is with us still. No word yet, though, on if the cancel culture will take down Ellen DeGeneres. They go after anybody and everybody for any reason they want. And yet they also don't care. They protect people. They ignore those that they love because Colin Kaepernick got a deal from Disney. Colin Kaepernick has a multi-million-dollar deal to make a TV show about his life from Disney for their app Disney Plus. This is the same guy who tweeted a couple days ago that celebrating the 4th of July was akin to celebrating white supremacy. That's a tweet that's out there in the world. It's not been taken down. He's not even getting ridiculed that much by the entirety of the media, certainly by sectors, I think, sectors like myself, but not everybody else, because that tweet still, to me, is jarring. I was a guy that maybe a few weeks ago was saying I was interested in seeing Colin Kaepernick on an NFL field and interested in seeing how that would go. And I even think that I said at the time I felt bad for him because of the amount of interest for both those that support and those that did not support him during his years not in the NFL, because he's not the most talented quarterback to play football. He's not close. No one thought that he was one of the best in the league. He's not getting the kinds of money that Patrick Mahomes just signed. The $500 million deal is not coming his way as an NFL talent because it's not what he is. So when that much scrutiny goes into a player that's not capable, I think, of living up to the desires of those who support him, and certainly at times maybe going to underperform like those who are critical of him, it'll create a very difficult atmosphere for him, even if he plays. Because I think a lot of the teams in the NFL that were considering putting him on their team were going to do it as a backup, which is what he truly has been a majority of his career. His arm strength is great, but he's not elite at all. And now, on top of that, you got this. You got these statements that are gonna definitely add flame to that fire that is the debate as to whether or not he's valuable to a business. If you say things, if he had done this on television and not just Twitter, although they're essentially the same thing, would there be more of an outcry? I don't know. We'll figure it out as we go. It's Craig Collins filling in with for the Chad Benson Show. A lot more coming up. I'm going to have a day.
This is the Chad Benson Show. Independent thoughts, independent life. This is Chad Benson.
This is the Chad Benson Show. My name is Craig Collins. On social media, if you check it at all, the story of the day is Don Lemon and Terry Crews. That seems to be the story of the day so far. I'm sure there's a lot of stories that'll emerge throughout every single day that we have here. But this one, it seems like it's going nowhere and nowhere fast. And the reason why, I guess, is that a whole lot of people think that Terry Crews is totally wrong, made no points. Don Lemon dominated him. That's what I read on several posts. And the audio that I played earlier on in the show was actually Don not even letting Terry talk. But I've now found the audio that was before it, audio that I saw live. And look, let's try as hard as we can for those that disagree with any of the statements that are about to come from one Terry Crews. Just listen to them as concepts, as facts, as ideas. And again, I want to say this too. The Black Lives Matter thought, maybe not necessarily the movement, the organization, the people involved in it that have a lot of complicated views and have threatened to burn things down if they don't get the way they want. But just the simple message that black people matter to Terry Crews seems to mean everybody who's black. Everybody who's black matters. All lives that are lost in the community that he's a part of are important to him. And that's what's being criticized. I just want to say it again. The fact that he cares that people that are black are dying are being killed by anybody, even if it's other people in the community in cities like Chicago, he feels like that's part of saying the sentence that lives matter, specifically Black Lives Matter. And Don Lemon apparently does not believe so. So again, I preface all of that by saying that that's the simple message. I don't know how it's problematic or unwoke or all the things it's going to be accused of being. But here is Terry trying to make that point.
When I describe this, when you look in the city of Chicago, there are 9 children who died by gun violence, by black on black gun violence from June 20th all the way to today. And you're talking about even with the Atlanta child murders, there were 28 kids who died in 2 years. You're talking about a month, and you have 9 black kids, and the Black Lives Matter movement has said nothing about this.
What does that have to do with equality, though, Terry? I don't understand what that has to do with equality, because listen, there's crime. There are people in those communities those people aren't just being nonchalant about. I
think I'm going to have to play too much Don Lemon to give you the right context here, but But the fact that his response, and throughout the entire conversation, I guess they had the other day, and I can't watch all of it on that channel. I can't watch Don Lemon for that long all the time on that channel. But the conversation they had went back and forth as to whether or not it was appropriate to mention lives that were lost that were not being taken by white people, by law enforcement, and by people that would be, accused of, or in a lot of cases, maybe rightfully considered a racist. And that would certainly be the police officer who killed George Floyd. There's a lot of problems in the world for sure. And yet it's surreal to me that Terry Crews is trying to make a point about how Black Lives Matter, and he means all Black lives that are lost, and Don Lemon has a problem with that. About gun violence. I lived in Chicago. There are many people who are working in those communities to try to get rid of the gun violence. The gun culture in this country is prevalent, but I don't understand what that has to do with a movement that's for equality for Black people. It's not mutually exclusive that if you care about equality for Black people, that somehow you're going to stop random violence or, unfortunately, kids from being shot. It just seems like apples and oranges. Before I even let Terry Crews respond to that, I've also lived in Chicago for a long time, and I will tell you this about the South Side of Chicago and the amount of violence that takes place there. It's higher than anywhere else in the city, and there's a lot of reasons probably why, and you get experts on to give you all kinds of reasons as to why when I worked in Chicago radio. And one of the things that a lot of people would say is there needs to be a bigger focus by the entirety of the city on that area. There needs to be an equal amount of things happening in that area to help prevent this violence. Things like uplifting the schools in the area. There needs to be equality. I don't know how it's not a discussion of equality to say that the way in which you reduce what is extreme levels of violence in certain areas and certain communities is by adding more equal treatment to those areas and those communities. That's usually an argument you hear all the time on the left, that this is a way in which this happened because of this system and it's terrible. And so the only thing to do is to try to fix the system. And yet right now in this very interview, when Terry Crews is pointing out some of the violence that exists, Don Lemon completely dismisses the idea that is it all tied to what you hear all the time is the systematic problem in general. That is, again, surreal to me. But Terry, you get to speak on my show. Go ahead.
It's not that way. This is the thing, Don. Black people need to hold other Black people accountable. I said this the same thing. This is the Black America's version of the Me Too movement. If anything is going to change, we ourselves need to look at our own communities and look at each other and say, this thing cannot go down. And this is the thing, too. There are a lot of great, great people there who are held hostage by people who literally are running these neighborhoods with violence and then claiming that Black Lives Matter.
I can't understand how that point isn't valuable to anyone who cares about this cause. I can't understand that. I'm at a loss for words, actually, again, which is bad in my industry and in my line of work to feel that way. But it makes no sense to me that if you want to improve a lot of different things that exist in the world, and if you're from a certain group of people, whatever group that is, I don't even care if in this case it's the Black Lives Matter thought, the Black Lives Matter movement, or any other movement to help a community, even just an impoverished community, do better in the world, to then select what portion of that conversation you're going to have is exactly the thing that the left always accuses the right of doing. To pick and choose which parts of the conversation are valuable and which ones deserve to be ignored is a common attack all the time. And yet at the same time, right now, you're hearing it happen on the air, and then it's being praised in both media and online. You're hearing people say, man, that was such a great conversation. Don Lemon dominated the terrible thoughts that were Terry Crews's. And Terry Crews's point, if I'm getting it right, and I'd love for someone to correct me, I know that'd be fine, on our Facebook pages, our social media pages, or on mine at Craig Collins Show on Facebook. Just tell me how I'm getting this wrong, what I'm misunderstanding, because the message I'm hearing from a famous actor who's utilizing his platform is to say that it's important to care about anyone that dies in our community. That's what he's saying. He's not disregarding the part of the message that Don is so focused on, but he's adding a part that no one seems to want to talk about. Because I don't know. I honestly don't know why. I'm at a loss for words. And as a white guy who feels at times you can't talk about this too much or you're going to get attacked, I guess I'll just move on to other things in the world because it's surreal. It's completely surreal to me that these conversations happen like this, and then the take that we see in the regular world is so different than the one that I feel like if you're just a rational person, you just take a step back, you turn off all the things in your brain that might make you expect certain things, and you just listen. You just listen to words that someone says. I don't know how you could possibly have a problem with it. Anyway, 76% of us added some quarantine pounds. I don't know if you were one of those people, but we packed on a little bit of delicious weight. Apparently, we did that by eating a lot of sweets, a lot of baked goods, a lot of enjoyable things. And we also, according to the survey, wore sweatpants or yoga pants predominantly in the house all the time. Now there's even a push to do things like maybe make some of that attire more normal outside in the regular world. 28% can't even remember the last time they put real pants on. I do get that, actually. If you're struggling and adding a little bit of more weight and you're still working from home, I implore you to put on regular pants. You can't go the whole time with the sweatpants and realize what you're doing to yourself. You got to try to squeeze into the regulars and then be like, oh man, okay, all right, I'm not going to have as many pieces of cake today. And cake is delicious, and my wife makes it a lot when she's stuck in the house. So I feel you. I hear you. I'm not telling you how to live your life. I'm just saying if you want to stop that a little bit more, the best possible approach is to put on the regular pants so that there's not as much give in that situation. I also saw this. What was your 15 minutes of fame is a question that's being asked on Reddit, on the social media platform. Apparently, a lot of people might have at one point or another, because of the world in which we live, the amount of internet things that exist, been relatively famous for a few minutes. So they'd like to know what it was. Were you ever on the news for anything? Maybe it's even just an interview. And by the way, I love that. I still love that. With all the different platforms we have in the world, all the different ways in which you can get your face, your image, a video of you, everything out there in the world, the minute that anybody you know is on regular news in your local community, people freak out. Even if it's just answering a question. The minute you see a relative, a friend, anybody, or they pop in for 2 seconds, we still have the same response to that. We always will. No matter how many YouTube videos they make or Facebook likes they get, the minute someone pops up answering a question from a news reporter, like, I saw you on the news. Because it's the best. It's the best version of that. That's the 15 minutes of fame that I guess I would always mention. But what was yours? That's been the question. A lot of people are asking. There's been a lot of comments about it. And even just the person asking the question has been told that it's now their 15 minutes of fame, putting the question out there to begin with. And my mind just wraps in circles around the thought that just was. I got to take a break. Craig Collins filling in. A lot more Chad Benson Show coming up.
No need to fear. We promise we won't give you a noogie and make you cry Russia, Russia, Russia.
Who is the fearless leader?
Fui.
Fui, fui, and double fui.
What is your language? This is a family show, remember?
Fui to family too.
Nostrovia. This is Chad Benson.
This is the Chad Benson Show. My name is Craig Collins. Kanye West still running for president. We're covering it day by day here, because I don't know how many days it's going to go on for. I assume he's still running for president. Actually, I don't think I've seen many statements from him. I still don't know if he has any organization of any kind for his presidential team, for his campaign. And I'd still love to see him debate people just because he's Kanye West. And half the time, he probably will say things that have nothing to do with anything. And he will definitely at least once call himself a living genius on his own, or at least lead other people to try to make that statement. But I saw this story, and actually the coverage even of the story, and I think it was in TMZ and Hollywood Reporter, in some ways, sounds like people might start to be coming aboard the Kanye for president message. I guess his companies took out loans, one for $2 million, one for $5 million. Yeezy, who's married to Kim Kardashian, you'd think would have access to money other ways, as some companies have been criticized for sure for being willing to pick up on a small business loan that might have been earmarked for companies that have less means. But I don't know how it would feel if you're Kanye and you got to go ask Kim for a loan to keep your companies afloat. I guess it saved 160 jobs for people that work for these companies that Kanye is in charge of. And so it's interesting to me because the pitch then, as I'm reading it in a few places, is that maybe he is qualified to be a politician because he's saving jobs. He's out there saving them. But wouldn't it have made more sense with the amount of money that is the Kardashian empire if he had gone that road? I mean, I'm surprised that even in this, there's not actually criticism for the fact that Kanye West, of the means that Kanye West has, would be one of those approved of a loan. But apparently he took out $7 million in total, saved 160 jobs, and as of right now, still running for president. But I will update you on a daily basis. I might just have to interpret memes, though, because depending on who it is that's talking about his presidential candidate, including his wife, Kim Kardashian, it might all be memes. It might for the entirety of the thing. I still really hope that if Kanye does appear in at least one debate, that Kim's in the stands, and then when called on, because someone's got to turn to her at some point. When called on, she just holds up a sign with a printed out meme. That would be the best version of life in 2020 for me. If we can get to that, I'll give up at that point. I'll be like, it's fine. We're done. It's good. Politics will get no better than that situation. I saw this story and it made me laugh a bit, probably in a lot of ways. I don't have any kids. I don't know if I'll have kids at some point in the future. My wife and I haven't had them yet. Who knows? But a father got very upset, 55-year-old guy, when his son, probably for the first time, I assume, beat him in an arm wrestling contest. The guy's 55 and he was drunk on Sunday. And his teenage son, who at least all we know about his age, he's under 18. Probably the dad doesn't even want to tell us how old the kid is now. But I guess Curtis Zimmerman of Florence, Kentucky, challenged his son to an arm wrestling contest, probably to the extent, I think I might even know the way it sounded. Like, you need to shut up. I can still beat you at arm wrestling. You're not that tough. Because that's how a 55-year-old man, I think, would talk. Well intoxicated and assuming he can beat his son at something like that. But, man, you can't overextend yourself in these worlds. Because I imagine as a father or as a parent, there's a positive and a negative to losing to your kids at things. You know, there's some area where like, okay, you're growing, you're getting better, you're becoming a man or whatever, I guess is going on. And then the same way as with all of us, you become a bit of a sore loser. You're like, I still wish I had won though. So then what happened next? Well, inevitably, I guess the son went upstairs because whatever amount of fighting transpired, he was done with it. And then Curtis took out his gun and fired 2 shots into the ceiling. The cops called, and then while everybody's safe, nobody got injured. I guess Curtis then had an 8-hour standoff with police. Police showed up at 1 a.m. He didn't give in until 9 o'clock. So let's recap the day for 55-year-old Curtis out of Kentucky. He wakes up. At some point, I imagine he's already getting into arguments with people. He gets drunk. At the end of the evening, he challenges his teenage son to an arm wrestling contest. And then he has an 8-hour standoff with law enforcement waiting before they finally bring him in. I guess he's charged with wanton endangerment. But again, no one was actually hurt in it. This all goes to show you that maybe the things you want to do, like play a game, like Monopoly, for example. I don't think anybody should ever play Monopoly with Curtis, or maybe anybody. Maybe this is a lesson for all of us, that at times like this, with anger and maybe a lot of things, frustration at an all-time high, this is not the time for family conflict to this extent, because you never know if the cops are going to be involved in an 8-hour standoff. And by the way, just real quick, and I guess this is kind of an unfair shot, but I'm going to take it. If there were no cops, if the police get defunded, how does this story transpire then? How different is this than being a story that's being covered as stupid criminals doing silly and dumb things, and maybe something completely different? Cops respond, and the guy takes 8 hours to realize that he's really not, at all interested in the things that have escalated throughout that evening. But if there's no cops, if there's no one to call, this situation feels like a lot of situations utterly different. And do you want to be a neighbor that's asked to intervene here? If you want to be called into something and walk into this and be told, like, what happened? What, you guys were arm wrestling? He beat you and now you're upset? No. You want professionals to handle a situation like this so it's de-escalated, even if it takes all night, which obviously they stayed all evening from 1 o'clock to 9 o'clock to make this whole thing go away and have it being covered in the Lexington Herald-Ledger as a dumb criminal story and nothing more than that. That is, I think, kind of in some ways a cheap shot to make a point, but it's tremendously true. I can't envision how different that story could have been if there's just no checks and balances to even people who for a moment and a moment of drunken stupidity do a lot of things that I'm sure they probably regret in the light of day. Also, I saw this. Charlize Theron is upset that she's not going to be in the Mad Max spinoff. Apparently, there's going to be another Mad Max movie, and Charlize has been left on the sidelines. She said she loved her character. Those movies are crazy. Those movies are interesting, and I wonder why her character won't be in it. But I guess it's a prequel, so Charlize has been recast as with a younger actress who maybe makes more sense there. But I don't know. I feel bad for you too, Charlize. Maybe you make a spinoff of your own. That's how everybody does it now. Put it up on the YouTube. This is Craig Collins filling in on the Chad Benson Show.
The Chad Benson Show.
independent thoughts, independent life. This is Chad Benson.
This is the Chad Benson Show. My name is Craig Collins, filling in today. Happy to be with you. The president tweeted out today that COVID-19, which he then called the China virus, death rates have plunged from peak in U.S., a tenfold decrease in mortality. The Washington Times reports we have the lowest mortality rate in the world. The fake news should be reporting these most important of facts, but they do not. That is a factual statement. The coronavirus cases have upticked. That is something you're going to hear everywhere and anywhere that you watch when listening to coverage of this. But the actual death rate has plunged, in part, people are saying, because of the amount of young people that are getting COVID-19. The reason I even bring this up is because I love some audio from Fox News and the 5 that happened the other day. And I just love it because of how Greg Gutfeld gets just so mad. He's so angry at the question he gets asked, and then the way in which the question is sort of dismissed after the entirety of his answer in just a few words that also seem to be completely missing the point. But I love this audio. I know that this is just some news people interacting with each other, so maybe it's the kind of thing that a lot of other radio stations aren't playing today, but I'm playing it because I love it. I think it's hilarious. Here we go. Here is the interaction on the 5 from just the other day.
Greg, I was wondering about the political strategy here. How does the strategy of normalizing the coronavirus help the Trump campaign? I mean, obviously people are dying. This is no common cold, and I think that's evident to everybody.
Okay, before I let Greg talk, I continue to interrupt it after Juan speaks. The thing that's so interesting to me is the lack of genuine question that exists there, because I love the position that, well, how does it work as far as, as a campaign person or an expert in the way campaigns function? How does it work? Why would they normalize a virus that's taken a whole bunch of lives? How would that be beneficial to their campaign? That's not a real question. That's not at all what he's looking for. He's just looking for an acknowledgement that coronavirus is as deadly and scary currently as Juan thinks it is. And here's how Greg responds, which is why I think this is so great.
That's the craziest question you've ever done. Nobody's normalizing a virus, okay? But by the way, no one should take anybody in the media seriously in their questioning of process if they haven't actually made a correct piece of advice, okay? Let's face it. Number one, they politicized hydroxy. Remember that? They were so happy to find that one bad study that said it didn't work. Now they go strangely silent when you hear that it might work. And in fact, we all kind of knew that it might work. In terms of a strategy, it was well tolerated among people. We knew that there was promise, but the media didn't like that. 2, the rest home deaths. The media bent over backward to cover up for the Cuomos, right? They didn't want that to be a big story, but that was a big story, okay? So they covered up the rest home stuff.
I don't know if right now you're thinking, as you hear all that Greg hasn't made a point that's not correct yet, because he certainly has thrown a lot of stats out there, a lot of facts, while also just still being mad. You can hear it in the back of his, and I wonder this too, like if you've ever had a conversation with someone where maybe it's someone you care about more so than you're on television talking about it, and you don't want to get that mad. Like, no matter what they say, how they say it, you want to contain the anger. But in the back of your brain, it's sitting there. It's simmering. He's feeling it. He's throwing answers out. He's trying to keep it cool. But in the back of his brain, he's still thinking to himself, like, how could you ask me a question about assuming that the Trump campaign or anyone is trying to normalize this as if it's an everyday occurrence and no one should care even a little bit about it? That's insane as a question. Let's let Greg finish off.
They bashed a drug that had potential. They refused to cite the most important data on Earth, which is the reduction in death rates. That is the important thing. But you can't talk about the fact that that's plummeting. And then let's not forget the travel ban, right? Which many in the media, Juan, said that was stupid and said that it was racist, but that probably did a large part in preventing a lot of death. So the media and those who politicize this need to be ignored.
There's so many answers, so many things happening. I love the fact that you can hear so many groans and laughter when he mentions the travel ban again, because it is a talking point. It's now been months, obviously, since that happened, but a talking point that keeps needing to be brought up by those who support at least some of the actions that take place for our current commander-in-chief, our current president, because it is so widely just forgotten. The movements that are made, the general consensus by those who want to throw their opinion out every day and have it be one way no matter what actually occurs in the world, will tell you that the handling of this was terrible, that there was no moment of responding to this quickly. Every single thing done was to drag your feet and absolutely hurt us and cost us lives. And yet the travel ban happened at a time when no one was supporting it. Everyone that weighed in at the time, including, of course, the people on CNN, said that it was unnecessary and racist. They've said that. And now they say that none of the actions taken were taken quick enough. And yet everyone seems to forget that it's a self-fulfilling prophecy, to call it nothing else. In your brain, you wake up in the morning, you're like, all right, the guy that I hate that's in office is going to do something that I hate. And then you just wait. You just wait for something to happen. And the minute anything happens, you're like, I hate that. And you don't even know why yet, in my opinion. I think you just know you hate it. And then eventually you figure out why you hate it. But I think that's why those moments get mentioned. But here, I just love the ending of this interaction as they go to a commercial. Because again, it's to me, it's so funny that they cut to this and he's still yelling.
Well, I think there are more than 125,000 dead. Next up, Joe Biden is promising
I didn't know
to
that,
transform the nation. We're going to talk about that
this.
next on The Fire.
And you mute a guy. You get rid of him. You're like, I'm done with this. We're talking about something else coming up next, and that's the end of the conversation. And to me, it's surreal. It's fantastic in a lot of ways, actually, that you'd have that argument, and then you throw out that last act. Because you've also been in an argument like that. You and I, definitely everyone has been, and it doesn't have to be about anything. Actually, to me, it more reminds me of arguments you might have with loved ones, where you say something, you respond to a question, you give a very thoughtful, long answer, and again, in the back of your brain, you're just you're brimming with a little bit of what you can tell is some tension that's rising, and then they throw out a simple sentence that completely tries to disregard everything you just said, and then they move on. That's a thing in the world that exists, and it's funny that it happens on TV, and it's funny that the anger is just so palpable in so many ways to me that I'm enjoying that a lot today. I'll probably, I might play it again just for myself. I might keep you guys from having to deal with a third version of the Greg Gutfeld anger. But it's a good thing. It's a good thing because it's just part of the world we live right now, in all honesty, that we can't have conversations the way that we're supposed to. As far as the hydroxychloroquine mention that also exists there, Peter Navarro gave an interview, and I thought it was interesting, even though CNN is trying to get him as far as talking about mask wearing and the President of the United States. Peter did want to highlight some of the changes that have happened, at least in the medical community's understanding of a drug that for a long time was touted by the president. And then certainly, as Greg points out, for a little while was ridiculed by media as being just a completely wrong assumption. I think even some of the professionals, some of the medical professionals like a Dr. Fauci or Dr. Birx were weary of how confident the president sounded on hydroxychloroquine. And then as the information went back and forth on that, pivoted to other conversations, and yet now, and I have this audio, so I guess I can play it for you too, now it seems as though that understanding has changed and you're not going to hear about it. I don't think anyone's going to cover hydroxychloroquine in the depth that they probably should be covering it, because essentially, what is it, by the way? Like, what does that coverage look like on a CNN? And could you ever envision them doing it? Getting on the air and saying, we're sorry, we screwed up, we accused the president of being wrong about a thing that he's not wrong about. That's on us. We'll do better and move on. No, that never happened. In print, sometimes you got to issue a retraction. In the world of television, doesn't exist. But let's hear a little bit of that conversation, that interaction between Peter and our CNN panel of humans that at times make me laugh a lot.
Peter in the White House in terms of the coronavirus response.
Sure.
When do you personally wear a mask?
Whenever I'm in a situation where I cannot maintain appropriate social distancing.
What difference would it make if the president aggressively, visually supported mask wearing in front of the nation?
I can't speculate on that. I think that it's clear now that the president and the vice president strongly support the use of masks and social distancing. I mean, what? There's no more. Nothing more to squeeze from that orange.
He could wear one. I think. Look, he wear one. Peter, I'm only asking you because you've been instrumental. You've been instrumental in getting N95 masks and masks around the country. You obviously think masks are important.
Yes.
So would it help if the president did more?
Look, you guys beat that one to death, and I'm not going to get involved in that.
I mean, look, you have doctors around the country.
This is the difference, in my opinion, between dodging a question and answering a question and trying to pivot. The other day, I was very critical when I heard a politician, Tammy Duckworth specifically, pivot from a question she was asked about George Washington into a criticism of Donald Trump that to me made no sense. about the speech he gave on the 3rd of July at Mount Rushmore. This is answering a question and answering it 2 or 3 times and being asked new versions of the same question. Would it help for Trump to put a mask on, even if he were, I don't know, just like Obama, maybe giving, not Obama, like Biden, giving a speech and staying back from everyone more than 6 feet of distancing and talking through the mask for no point. If you're doing the other things you're required to do, and I am an advocate, by the way, of wearing a mask. I think it's a fine decision. I think everyone now seems to agree, at least in the political worlds too, that is fine. If you want to wear a mask and if your government thinks it's appropriate to wear one and advises you wear one, especially if businesses tell you to wear one because they're allowed to make decisions on their property. So wear a mask. But the fact that this is beat to death in this conversation is sort of crazy. And then Peter does try to transition to the conversation no one is going to talk about, which is how accurate the president may have been all along on hydroxychloroquine as a potential treatment for COVID-19.
It's a meme. It's a meme for CNN now.
Did Mitch McConnell beat it to death?
The president doesn't wear masks.
Did Mitch McConnell beat it to death?
Oh, my God. Everyone who gets near him's been tested. And nobody gets within 6 feet of him.
I'm just asking
what's the point here?
if a White House effort to emphasize the importance of mask wearing would make a difference.
You can keep asking it, and I'm not going to go there. It's like we've got some important time here together, John. And I think if you want us, my job here at the White House is to do 2 things: help the president save lives and create jobs. And today, I can help save some lives here today by raising the awareness about this medicine. It's $11 for a treatment course. You can take it home. Remdesivir is $3,000, and they got to stick a needle in your arm for 10 days, and you got to do it in a hospital setting.
Peter,
both of those drugs are going to be useful, but I think it's really important now, particularly as these cases rise, as you pointed out, that we at least talk a little bit about that.
Okay, and look, I was
talk a little bit about hydroxychloroquine when he's trying to get interrupted while doing it, because it's a treatment option that is tremendously affordable. The president was very optimistic about it very early on with the information that he had access to. And even though there was a study at one point that disregarded the treatment and said that there were risks that it was bringing to the situation, to the equation, that one study has now been debunked, and a large amount of additional medical research has demonstrated the value of a product. And this is one of the many things that again, you hear a certain narrative. The narrative takes place for as long as it possibly can. And the minute it's no longer valuable to them, you don't hear the narrative anymore. It's completely a forgotten topic and a topic you don't want to talk about. And instead, you got to ask a guy 6 times in as many ways as possible and interrupt him. Can you put a mask on the president actually? Can he actually put one on his face and wear it in a public setting, even if he's, I don't know, a full stadium away from everybody that's with him? And look, I don't even want to continue to say these sort of things because at times it makes me feel like what I sound like is a guy that doesn't have any problems with our president. And I absolutely have problems with the way he navigates certain things, with the way that he tweets that in ways that don't make sense to me, and maybe the unfiltered nature of his communication style in general at times can lead him to make some mistakes. And also his polling numbers, which, by the way, I do have some information on whether or not the COVID-19 pandemic is affecting his polling numbers. There's really interesting research about how in areas that are hit hardest currently by COVID-19, where they have a large amount of cases and or a large amount of seriously ill, the polling numbers in those areas is much lower for the president than in other areas. And I think that a byproduct of this whole thing, whether you agree with it or not, is that no matter who the president was, I think that'd be true. I think if you had illness in your community and you felt that at that very moment you wish there was more the government could do to help you and those that you know, you would blame anyone in any government office for not being there and helping on the ground while something like that was going on. But every time that you talk about anything that the guy does right, you're immediately going to get criticized for it. You're going to get yelled at for it. I think I might have mentioned this before on the show, actually. I remember a time during a conversation I had where I was going back and forth with someone about, just a lot of the different things that exist in the political world. And they said this statement to me to kind of end they actually did what Juan does to Greg to try to end the conversation. They looked at me, and this was maybe not when COVID-19 was quite as bad in our world as it is now, but it certainly was known to be a problem. This person, straight faced, looked me in the eye and said, if I ever got COVID-19, I'd bring it to a Trump rally because that's how much she hates the president and those that support him. That was surreal. At that moment, I was like, all right, you're a horrible person, and this conversation needs to end now because we're not going to have an accurate version of it. And that's just what I believe is true for a lot of people. In their brain, they have that self-fulfilling prophecy I'm talking about, which is you wake up in the morning, you hate a person, you need to hate the person for a new reason, I guess, so you find a reason to do it. This is Chad Benson's show. I am Craig Collins, the host. Quick break, a lot more in just a bit.
Take a fake news break. Check out the really important news of the day at our website, ChadBensonShow.com. Once there, click on Chad's free podcast and get real. The Chad Benson Show, where truth and the American way live. Print free.
This is the Chad Benson Show. My name is Craig Collins. I'm your host for the day. Chad is back tomorrow. I saw coverage of a story that I found hilarious just because of the epic pettiness, I think, as it was mentioned via the Twitter, that the post itself that went viral. So these are two neighbors that live next to each other. Obviously, it's a time of COVID-19, a time of coronavirus, so maybe there's some pent-up aggression that might even take place between neighbors. Maybe there's some things that a neighbor has done for a while that have made you mad. The unique situation here is that they share part of their lawn. One neighbor has a home that seems connected to the other neighbor, and just a little tiny patch of lawn. I'm saying that the amount of movements for a lawnmower, it's about 3 or 4 steps each direction, and you go back and forth maybe 2 or 3 times. So this would take you all of maybe 30 seconds to a minute to mow. But I think that maybe, and it is, I assume this because of the hilariousness in the image that I've put up, by the way, on my Facebook page, facebook.com/Craig Collins Show. You can find it on social media. It's a bunch of places too. But so what happened during the lockdown is that the neighbor stopped mowing his friend's or his neighbor's grass. So he'd mow his big lawn, his big, large front yard, and he'd leave that little patch unmowed. And this happened for weeks, to the extent that the guy who actually owns the house that was having the unmowed amount of grass put it up on social media. But just think about that for a quick second. And the reason I'm even trying to talk about this story is the escalating tension that probably exists between these two homeowners as that's occurring. Because it seems like the one guy who owns the house that's got the lawn mowed pretty nicely is probably doing it consistently. Weekly, bi-weekly, I have no idea. But probably a lot. Not to the extent of a golf course, but I think close. The other guy, maybe he doesn't even own a lawnmower, because the amount of total grass it looks like he has in his house is akin to, I guess a little bit bigger than a plant. So I wonder if he should even remove it. But the fact that this escalated to the extent that one guy's got a perfectly clean lawn, the other guy has this little patch of very tall grass, is hilarious to me. And people were celebrating it on social media as just a funny moment of passive-aggressive tension. But they got to have a talk about this, man. I mean, maybe once in a while, the guy who owns very little grass mows the whole lawn, and then all the rest of the time, this is like anything else you share. If you share between two individuals in a house or in an area, you got to find a way to make this work. But it's funny to me. Of course, I think a lot of people are just telling the one guy with the small patch of grass to just cut his grass. But I love the tension. I want it to keep going, man. Get that grass as tall as your house, bud. This is Craig Collins filling in on the Chad Benson Show.
This is the Chad Benson Show. Independent thoughts, independent life. This is Chad Benson.
This is the Chad Benson Show. My name is Craig Collins. All right, let's dive in. Let's focus on it for real. Poll numbers continue to indicate that Joe Biden is leading by a significant amount to Donald Trump, more significant than even in 2016. You'll hear some people say these are similar. They're not, but it's early. It's very early on. So those of you who support the president, those of you who do not want to see someone like a Joe Biden wind up in office for a myriad of reasons, obviously still have a lot of time to make that decision, so things may change. There's also an article talking about a COVID effect on polling numbers in certain areas, some of these battleground areas, depending on the amount of cases, the amount of illness, and also the amount of lives lost in any specific community. Right now, disapproval for the president of the United States is higher in communities that are dealing with with stronger outbreaks of COVID-19. That to me just simply makes logical sense. If something goes on in a certain community, you're going to disapprove of the people that you feel are in charge, no matter how accurate that is. And it almost to me sounds more like an emotional response to a situation that in some areas is much different than others, more so than anything else. So that is likely, even in this article, is talked about to change as we go further on, and hopefully the treatment, the response, the areas in which we improve outcomes for COVID-19 get better. Hydroxychloroquine being talked about as one of those potential options, and incredibly cost effective too, by the way. And those are things that might turn the tide for individuals who right now feel that's part of the problem. Also this, though, Wall Street may have adverse signs already taking place as far as an expectation that Joe Biden may be our president. One market research was quoted as saying Trump is consistently viewed as a positive for the stock market. The market is starting to worry that Trump will not be reelected. Other individuals, and this actually part of this story comes from the New York Times, which I know, by the way, is all over the place as far as credibility in our current world in which we live. But they also say, and they're quoting more researchers here, that right now the focus, both of clients, for hedge fund operators, for asset managers, and for any other big investment companies, is what it means taxes-wise if Joe Biden is our president and not Donald Trump, and how much impact that would have. There are also some other small indications right now in the stock market. Back on June 24th, it's reported that the market dropped about 2.5%, and this was during a broad-based rise in COVID-19 infections throughout the country, and an assumption that that will immediately correlate to the likelihood of Mr. Biden and not Mr. Trump, President Trump, winning his reelection, that Joe Biden would become president. So a fall of 2.6% is an indicator. They also say that right now is that focus a lot is on the conversations as to who will be the commander-in-chief of our military. Some stocks that exist within the military world have started to fall because of an assumption that that would be a very different situation if and when. And honestly, I think that this is the conversation that needs to be had along with others. It's not the only one, but President Trump has succeeded tremendously in the areas of our economy and in the finances of the American people. That is a win. There is no real reaction to that. You can certainly, I guess, cite the numbers that exist when places closed during the COVID-19 pandemic and how the stocks fell. But honestly, Wall Street has recovered better, truthfully, than anyone else right now. It seems like the Wall Street response is more projecting the future. And the only thing that appears, according to the New York Times, to be a potential negative on the finances of our country moving forward would be if President Trump did not get reelected, if the taxes that he set up would change in a sizable way, if corporations would be impacted by it. And, just to reflect on that even more, corporations right now, as much as anyone else, businesses are absolutely struggling with the fallout of their world changing at a time when they couldn't operate, a lot of them, in the way in which they're used to. And then other businesses not operating, impacting the bottom lines of a lot of companies that expect to, do business with companies that weren't operating. So there's so many ways in which I think that the recovery of our country financially is fragile, at the very least, to call it fragile. And so a transition like this, at a time like this, will have a major impact on the economy. And I think that if there were ever an argument that helps to maybe not even necessarily promote our president as much as take a valid shot at the alternative, it would be this one. There's a lot of things you can say, of course, but this one seems, even in sectors and in publications that are often derided by the president, to be sort of a universally agreed upon thing, and something you probably don't hear covered a lot in the world of media, that the world in which we live financially would be impacted quite negatively by Biden becoming our president. That is a simple statement that seems to be agreed upon by a lot of people. In other news, kind of financial news, I guess, amusing financial news to me, Aston Martin is selling a 007 Goldfinger car for millions of bucks, and I desperately want it. I'm not going to throw it down. The wife would beat me, and I don't think we have the money for that kind of thing to happen, but she'd beat me with shoes if I ever tried to roll up in a car this expensive. One was sold at auction for $4.6 million, but now they're making new ones. They're making new ones, and they're rolling them out. That, I think it's my dream car, a James Bond and Aston Martin car, and you'd have to drive it at least once as if you were a secret agent. You'd have to one time. You wouldn't be able to stop yourself, probably the first time. This is the biggest reason I'll never, ever buy a fancy automobile. I think I've got to stick with the the older, I don't want to say the word crappy, but the crappy cars that I've owned throughout my life. Because the first purchase, driving home, the temptation is too high to go nuts. And the minute you go nuts, if you get in an accident day one, that's a day you're going to regret for a long time, because that car is never going to get back the value you just spent on it if you crash it on the drive home. And I'm sure I'm the guy that would be reported in the news for doing that, especially if it's an Aston Martin. How could you not? But I think it's kind of cool. They're going to reproduce 25 of these iconic DB5s that were featured in the movie Goldfinger. It's a good time for that. I think it's a real good time for that. In other news, and actually I think I'm just doing a UK segment now all of a sudden, there is a story at Fox News about a group of people who live in Cornwall. This is an area that's a popular tourist destination in England, that have hung a sign for anyone and everyone that would leave their regional airport that said turn around and some other things I can't say on the radio, trying to discourage tourism. What's interesting about this story is not necessarily that sentiment that some people would be upset if people travel into your community for fear of the health things that exist in our world, but that the government there had to respond by saying, I'm not sure if our citizens are aware, but the way in which we make a large amount of our revenue here in this place is we do it via tourism. So it might not be the best of ideas for us financially right now for you to tell anyone and everyone, especially those who are not ill and those who are coming from places that we're okay with, to turn around and go screw themselves, again, for lack of the actual words that they use, because that would be fairly devastating on their economy. And that is a microcosm of the problem, right? That is a great example of how the financial world and the health worlds will always differ on their opinions of what is right or wrong. And you got to come to some medium that makes sense for everybody so that we don't lose one in order to help the other. And there's a lot of ways in which that gets done. But certainly if you're talking about, I guess, the negatives far too often, all the time, every day, that the citizens in your community don't want a single tourist to walk through those doors, and then obviously have a huge lack in finances, well, that's probably not the right way to go about it. I also saw that, and this amused me a lot, actually, Americans are officially, this is the quote, ditching the summer body. That's right. You can give up. You don't have to keep trying for that summer bod. It's not as important as it is in years past. The only thing that people would like to get is a post-quarantine body. That's what a new study has claimed. Americans have lost all hope that the summer body is of any need. This is after a survey of 2,000 Americans. 63% said what they're going to focus on is the post-quarantine version of themselves. Reports found that these long days in lockdown have been a wake-up call to some respondents, with 64% of people saying they'd like to eat a lot healthier. 63% of those polled said that there's now place for more of a priority on their diet as opposed to even the working out. I think this is interesting, though, because I've seen my wife find a lot of unique ways to work out in our house when we were stuck under quarantine more than we are now. A lot of unique ways. She did Zumba classes online. She danced with an Xbox video game that I have. She found ways to do it. But really, and truthfully, I guess a lot of Americans are saying diet is the first mistake that so many of us make. And certainly at a time like now, maybe more than ever, that's even more true. And so maybe that's a better move than trying to do as many Zumba classes as you can in the living room. 75% of respondents said they were in agreement that they're starting to feel like they're living the same day over and over again as well. So dusting it up, exchanging it a bit makes a lot of sense to people. I get that. That makes sense to me, too. Let's move on to one other story that I found in the news and I thought was interesting, and hopefully you find it as interesting as I do, although I just can't imagine that this makes sense to a lot of people. There's a guy by the name of Brian Welsh. He lives in Michigan, and he has started to talk about what he thinks is a new sensitivity. And he calls people the sensitives, which right there, by the way, the minute that you're going to call a group of people that you want to help out the sensitives that's not a good move. I think a lot of people are going to have a problem with the simple idea that there are even such a thing as sensitives. But anyway, he's a respiratory therapist who has occasional issues with allergic reactions to things and certain foods that he developed reactions to. He now believes that the pain, the things that are caused in his body, are just in general a cause from the world itself. There's a new book out called The Sensitives, The Rise of Environmental Illness and the Search of Americans' Last Pure Place, meaning that there's nowhere on Earth, I guess, nowhere here in the United States where you can have pure interactions with the world. According to the authors, the other sensitives have powerful, debilitating symptoms, including fatigue, brain fog, muscle aches, and migraines resulting from chemicals. Not sure which ones or where they are that just exist in the world. The most mundane household items can trigger them, causing flare-ups. These are things like deodorant, garage bags, Wi-Fi, pretty much anything. Wi-Fi. Oh, I love that Wi-Fi is mentioned. I don't understand that. As a result, sensitives often go to extreme lengths to avoid any of these chemicals. They'll hang pieces of mail on a clothing line to off-gas the contaminants before opening them. That means you can't interact with your mail until you know it's safe to do so. And I don't mean for COVID-19. I mean for apparently anything else that exists in there. One woman afraid of chemicals used to sanitize waiting rooms has convinced her doctor to conduct her exams in the backseat of her car instead of in the office because she can't go in there. I mean, this is extreme. This is reacting in a way, and maybe it's tied to COVID-19 somehow, where you're just going a totally different road. And I don't know if it makes you feel better. I guess that's on you. But there's certainly lines. If I was that doctor, I wouldn't have agreed to that. By the way, I guess this book originally started getting researched in 2016 before now because sensitives, including the ones who wrote the book, were largely seen as freaks. And that needed to change. We need to re-understand that it didn't help that the American Medical Association and the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention have not classified an illness here. That doesn't help them. Instead, you need to listen. You need to hear the words they're saying and the fact that any and all things that exist in the world, chemicals, what have you, potentially can flare them up and cause issues in their body. Oh my God. Okay. I'm going to take another break. I'm going to digest as much as I can. I'm going to try not to become sensitive to anything because I'm afraid that it might be horrible for me. But a quick break and a lot more. Craig Collins filling in on the Chad Benson Show.
If you're part of the politically exhausted majority, don't fear. Your time to be validated and rejuvenated is here. Wake up. It's the Chad Benson Show.
This is the Chad Benson Show. My name is Craig Collins, your host. Chad is back tomorrow after a well-deserved extended vacation, extended holiday, I should say. A Florida man is the latest guy to be ridiculed on social media for getting very upset when an elderly woman asked him to wear a mask at Costco. This is something that happened recently, and I just don't understand all the sides of this. To be honest with you, if a business is choosing to require you to wear a mask, you got to wear one when you go into the business. If they don't require it, you don't have to. And I know that there's going to be states that have all different kinds of things there, so maybe in ways that might not exactly be factual, but it in a sense is. And certainly you can go to a business that doesn't require it, but what we're seeing on an almost daily basis is people interacting with other people. It's not necessarily a business employee or someone walking up and telling you to wear something. It's somebody else. In this case, it's an old woman that went up to a guy and said, hey, you got to wear a mask inside this Costco. And the guy was not having it. I won't even play the audio for you because it's a tirade that makes no sense. And the yelling and screaming in it is just crazy. In the shocking video, though, he asks her at one point, you're harassing me with a question mark, to which the man behind the camera replies, I'm not harassing you. You're coming close to me. This is because two things now happen when interactions, when fights break out in just public spaces. Someone argues with somebody else, and a third party pulls out their cell phone and starts taping. That's the way that every action works now. And depending on how crazy the fight is or what's going on, several other people may tape it. And then the person becoming a photog for a moment there, essentially becoming very akin to like a paparazzi person, could, I guess, get a little bit too in the face of the people that are having the interaction. But so this takes place. The guy goes off on everybody, screaming a lot of bad words, screaming a lot of things about how stupid all this is and how he doesn't have to wear a mask. And I don't get that we have a story like this every day. And I'm not here to tell you what to do with your own freedoms as they exist in our country. But at the same time, I am here to tell you that this is a bad look. This is a bad look all around to be screaming at an elderly woman who's trying to ask you to wear a mask inside a Costco in Florida. There's no winner in this story. And certainly, I guess, if the mask were on and the interaction doesn't happen, in my opinion, we're in an easier place. And I get it. I get the pros and cons of that argument. I get the slippery slope things that I've been told by friends about how you agree to one thing, it's 25 things 2 minutes later. And yet this one specific thing that I'm being asked to do, and a lot of us are being asked to do, to me, is more valuable to prevent the interaction than anything else involved in it. So that's just that. I guess that's my take. But it's another viral one, and we're going to keep seeing it. I think it's going to be an almost daily basis that what you're going to hear is, okay, these two people interacted. Someone was very upset because a mask was demanded by a business, whatever. I mean, just the other day, we had the person who went crazy at a Target and threw things. And we have more, and they're being called all kinds of names on social media, and the interactions are going back and forth. But truthfully, I guess let me ask you this, and I want everyone as best you can to respond to this. Is it just the slippery slope concept that makes you not desire, outside of those who have a medical illness, where they do not want to wear something because it would impact their ability to breathe? Those people I absolutely understand. But everyone else, is it making a point whether you wear the mask or not? Is it siding with one side or the other for the sake of doing it? Or is the real reason here just the idea that when you give in to something like that, you know, the next request is going to be more uncomfortable, and you're just going to keep going down a line you don't want? Or, I guess, and this is the last version of what I assume could be the answer to my question, you're just not that scared of getting it, depending on who you are and how seriously ill you project to be based on the latest information we have. Certainly young people, there are photos going viral every day of interactions in large groups of crowds getting together on beaches or for parties, indoors, outdoors, what have you. Certainly, obviously, there was the peaceful versions of protesting that had a whole lot of people without masks. So I ask, I'm curious, what's the reason to not wear one if you have one? This is Craig Collins filling in on the Chad Benson Show. More coming up soon.
Chad Benson Show.
Independent thoughts, independent life. This is Chad Benson.
This is the Chad Benson Show. My name is Craig Collins filling in. Chad is back tomorrow after a well-deserved extended holiday. Chad will be back with you, so no more Craig, which probably I imagine a lot of people would be happy about. But I'm thrilled to be here. I enjoy being a part of the show. I want to start off by talking about a few of the things that are happening at a statewide level. Republican Governor Brian Kemp of Georgia has declared a state of emergency and authorized deployment of 1,000 Georgia National Guard troops amid a surge of violence that exists in the state. This is a common trend. Almost everywhere in our country right now, you're seeing an uptick in violence, along with, I guess, a push in a lot of areas to rethink the way in which law enforcement officials interact with their community, whatever community that would be. Even in Atlanta, where you're seeing that the law enforcement people that work there are predominantly minorities, and yet the individuals that are protesting in those areas are upset with the way in which those individuals are interacting with their community. So this is a conversation that's going to keep happening in a lot of places. But one thing that absolutely is a fact and is maybe not being covered as much as the uptick in violence, all sorts of places. Of course, also in Georgia specifically, there's been a strong reaction to the death of an 8-year-old girl who was shot at the Wendy's, which was, or very close to the Wendy's, the same location where Rashard Brooks was killed in Atlanta a few weeks ago. It is surreal to see the amount of violence that's taking place, and that there's still a conversation, at least with some politicians, as to what the right thing to do is. And obviously in Georgia, they believe the right thing to do would be to act on that. Also, then you have conversations in places like Chicago about what is the right, appropriate response to the issue that's always existed there. The amount of violence that is not necessarily new, but certainly increased in areas of that city throughout this last few months, throughout even, I think, parts of the coronavirus pandemic might have increased some of the feelings there. And I have a Chicago pastor here who gave an interview just the other day. His name is Donovan Price, who speaks just a little bit about his feelings on what makes the most sense to pull back. And he says something at the very end of this conversation, which I think has been highlighted quite a bit in a lot of areas, because it is a few words that if you're a different person saying them, you get in a lot of trouble for saying them. But the black Chicago pastor who gave this interview certainly is not being criticized quite as much for what he said. But let's hear from him as you discuss how to start to pull back on the violence that exists outside of, obviously, re-allowing law enforcement, and in the case of Georgia, the National Guard, to be a bigger part of that solution without being vilified for solving issues like that. Here is the pastor.
A message for our country is, if you are a praying person, then now is the time to pray. but prayer always comes with action. And so prayer with action, churches getting out of the walls, realizing that you still got to reach the lost. The original messages, and just like in basketball, they say sometimes you've got to go back to the basics. Well, now we've got to pray. We've got to hit the streets. We've got to care for each other, realizing that these children that die are our children. Surely they may be somebody else's child, but they're our children. It's our block, every block.
Yes, we're all Americans.
We have to take back our cities.
We have to take back our cities is the last sentence he says there. And granted, I'm not sure that he says it in exactly the same way as people like the president may have said a similar thought, but just hear it again.
We have to take back our cities.
We have to take back our cities. And he believes that from the standpoint of the community itself and of the religious leaders that exist in each community and how they go into those communities and have conversations with the individuals in them in order to help prevent violence that way. And of course, that then also would involve, in my opinion, and a lot of opinions, a way in which either the National Guard or law enforcement in general is involved in helping to take a community back from anyone else that might be in control of, anyone else that might feel as though they are an authority in the area. I mean, there's no better example than what happened in Seattle. The amount of violence in Seattle skyrocketed by hundreds of percentage points at the time when they had an authorized zone that disallowed cops from really being in the area unless under extreme circumstances. And even then, you have people who were victims of violence that are trying to sue police officers for not responding sooner, even though the community decided they weren't welcome there and then prevented the officers from getting in when things would happen. And once they don't respond quick enough, I guess, to someone who's actually the victim. And actually, this all goes to a couple points that Herschel Walker has been making recently that I find interesting. On his social media page, on his Twitter page, I think it was a little over a week or two ago, he said that anyone that feels that law enforcement officials need to not be part of an area, and I'm paraphrasing this, should be given a free trip to a country that doesn't have law enforcement and then allowed to come back and see, of course, how they feel about their time spent without the ability to do things like calling 911. I'm not saying that I advocate that response, but that is a very interesting concept that you don't really know what you're asking for until you experience it, much like Seattle got to experience what it would be like to have individuals that aren't necessarily designed to be the protectors of a community being the ones that decide to take on that role, and then how evenings got as dangerous as they did. But here's Herschel Walker again talking about some of the other issues he sees on a daily basis and what he also thinks might be a solution to that.
Hey, it's Herschel here, working out. Hey, I was watching some kids, African American and Caucasian kids play the other day, and I started thinking about their future. And then I was listening to a BLM protester who's speaking for the black people, and I said, wait a minute, he don't speak for me. He don't speak for a lot of other people that I know. And I was watching all the people that wanted to take over a city block, and not just black, that was Caucasian, there was all types of race there. And I said, wait a minute, they don't speak for the people I know. Why is these companies giving money to these groups? For what? Where's my freedom? Where's my freedom that I don't want to tear down statues? I don't want to defund the police. I don't want to riot and tear people's stores up. I want to do it the right way. So Congress, senators, where's my freedom to speak? If you're a leaker and you decide to leak information that's not true, isn't that like shouting fire in a crowded building that you need to be punished?
Those are Herschel Walker's thoughts. Those are not necessarily thoughts I disagree with, but I'm not the one articulating them. Herschel Walker is saying that he believes that even the voices that speak for communities are not necessarily the right ones to speak for the entirety of a community. Depending on who you are and what decision-making or what things you believe in, that's not necessarily, and this goes to a point that I make a lot and a point that I probably make too much, that I think social media is behind that. The assumption that everybody agrees with you. And so anything and everything you say, you start to think, all right, well, this is an opinion everybody has, when the actual truth is that no, there's probably a lot of opinions that are yours and ones that people, no matter what community they're in, your community or another, probably have a nuanced version that might be different than yours. All right, let's shift to something else that I find fairly amusing and something that's much lighter than the topics we've covered throughout the show today. There is a new fad going on for younger parents that is probably odd to a lot of us. It is something that involves co-parenting, co-child rearing, but not necessarily any form of romantic connection. That is right. People are looking to have kids with other people, just because they feel like that biological clock may be ticking and they want to get that done. This is akin to the Fox TV show Labor of Love that I've been tremendously entertained by at times, especially when they made some of the guys go through fake versions of birth, of labor pains, because that's just entertaining television. I got to be honest. But this is a new fad, and it's happening a lot of places. Two strangers meet either through an app or some other means, discuss their desire to jointly raise a kid, probably even size up the value that each brings to the table in that world. I mean that probably financially and a lot of other ways. These are people predominantly in their 20s and 30s who decide then that it makes sense that I have come into some sort of business agreement with someone else, and where I think there's even comedy movies based on this concept from years ago. But this is now a fad and a real thing. And I can't envision how valuable this would be. And if you make a mistake in this world, if you meet a stranger through an app and then you talk to them and you decide to have a child with them, what if you regret that some years later? There's not really a divorce proceeding that you go through. So I don't know how that works. I don't know if you could like trade halfway through and find someone else on the app to obviously you can't. I think there's going to be some rights involved in making that not make sense. But 60 to 70% of these sites say that there's more women than men using them right now. But there's a lot of individuals that are going on and offering an ability to start a family. I don't even know if you live together in this situation. It says that those are all over the place. You might co-parent and then just, have separate moments of custody, but it's much like a dating site is what they're saying. You set up a profile, you give a lot of detailed interest and what you envision your child to be, and then you match with people until you find the right one. We can't talk to each other so much that in order to have children now, we got to turn to an app and a stranger. I hope that that's not true. I hope that this trend decreases over time, and it's not that it's certainly like a in and out kind of fad, and that wasn't even meant to be a euphemism, but I very much hope that this is something that doesn't continue for a majority of, but I don't know, I guess to each your own. If this is the way you want to do it, there's a bunch of parenting websites and things available to you to get this done. And if not, just pitch the TV show to one of the networks. Right now, I think they're open to a lot of suggestions. All right, this is Craig Collins filling in on the Chad Benson Show. A lot more coming up.
Don't let the Washington Beltway strangle you. This is where the exhausted majority comes to refuel, realign, and reevaluate. This is Chad Benson.
This is the Chad Benson Show. My name is Craig Collins. I'm your host for today. Chad is back tomorrow. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell has signaled that there is likely to be one last stimulus check of some kind sent out to Americans. It may focus on the least wealthy of Americans, Americans that make about $40,000 or less a year. And it would be absolutely the last version of this that is sent out, according to Mitch. But it is something that there's a growing sentiment that needs to happen and should happen. And it seems like there might be at least unilateral agreement. How that looks when it's all said and done is probably a different thing than either side is really talking about, because the amount of crazy that's going to come from the House Democrats as far as what deserves to be passed is going to be a little bit different than what everybody else is talking about. Need I remind you, I hopefully don't, of the $3 trillion package that was passed by the House Democrats in order to direct funds to all kinds of things, well beyond just maybe the things that are most financially valuable to those impacted by COVID-19. Certainly a lot of other areas were addressed in that package. That is a very unlikely version of any sort of law or any sort of stimulus to be passed, because it's just ridiculous. But Mitch McConnell did say, I think the people who have been hit the hardest are people who make $40,000 a year or less. Many of them work in the hospitality industry. The hospitality industry itself, as you know, is just rim-racked, hotels, restaurants, and so they could well be part of it. But other than that, he does say that this would be the last version, as I said, of anything that gets sent out, because you just can't keep going. And I think one point he made is that our current deficit is about equal to the amount of GDP, the amount of output we have, and that's the first time that's happened since a world war. So that's a bad thing. We need to not go a whole lot further and just keep writing check after check, and honestly got to find other ways to have the economy exist, way to have businesses capable of employing the people that maybe are currently unemployed in a lot of areas, so that things get much, much better for everyone involved. I also saw this, though, speaking about businesses and ones that might be doing very well in all this. Amazon just continues to have their stock go skyrocketing upwards. And this is probably a myriad of reasons, from just the simple fact that for a long time it was probably the absolute best way to purchase things and to feel safe. But Amazon actually even wound up having to prioritize which things were for sale on their platform during that time, or which things you could actually get delivered quickly. They had to go with the most essential of items at first. But Amazon has COVID-19 to thank in part, but not in its entirety. Prime itself, their subscription service, is doing better than ever for people signing up for it. Maybe also, again, because they wanted the free delivery on stuff. They're closing in on history. Amazon could be on its way to becoming the first $2 trillion U.S. company to exist. Its current market cap is $1.525 trillion. Others in the running for that include Apple and Microsoft, which market caps are at 162 and 159. But Amazon's the one that continues to trend upward day after day, week after week, month after month, to a degree that we've never seen before. The first $2 trillion company ever in the world came from a different sector, but this would be the first American company to reach that milestone, and it would be quite a thing to see it happen. It's not all shopping, by the way. Amazon does provide web services, including streaming services to watch TV, which become a huge portion of it. But there's a lot of different ways, I guess, in which it diversifies. And honestly, there's that conversation, too, which I probably don't have enough time for today. But in general, as to whether or not it makes sense for these large companies to take over several different sectors of the world in which they exist, to not just be a company that facilitates the transport of products and sells products, but does a lot of other things, too. And this is everything from just selling the food, the hand sanitizer, the baked goods that they have. Certainly companies like Facebook also having the social media platform and then offering additional goods. Apple, another one that does a lot beyond just selling you a computer. So there is an argument to be had, and one that probably continues to happen as we see the rise in companies like this, as to whether or not it makes more sense to look at these as companies that need to be broken up. All right, I have one last story I want to touch on today, and I'm spending a little bit of time talking about it because my producer Phil and I found this one and wasn't sure the best way to navigate it, but it is interesting. There's aspects of it that are, maybe attractive to people. It's a $10,000 summer job. That's the offer that's been put out. TMZ has reported on it. So one lucky person will get $10,000 for a summer gig. They need to spend the summer, though, testing toilet paper and some toilet paper alternatives. That's right. There is a bidet company out there in the world that wants to make sure its product is as valuable and as effective as it needs to be. So it wants to name one person a executive in a way. This would be the vice president of, I think I could say this, the vice president of certain types of matter of the, oh man, now I'm already regretting the fact that I'm doing this story, but I'm having fun. It'll definitely stand out in your resume, is what they say, is one of the big pushes to do a gig like this, is that if you have, I worked at Walmart for a little while, I was this, I was that, and then, I was the vice president of fecal matter for a while for a bidet company. People be like, what now? What'd you do there? But yeah, you got to test out their product, a bunch of other products. It's a 3-month consulting position. It's with a company called Tushy, which, by the way, just good job in naming your company, which fashions itself as a modern bathroom brand, revolutionizing the way in which we handle things in that world. And honestly, that's a company that you'd assume would skyrocket in the amount of focus we had on that over the last few months. When toilet paper was not an option, I think I remember at least one, if not many, stories about how the bidet world was skyrocketing here in the United States. All applicants must submit a video, and we got to say that's going to be a little bit tough, I just assume. You've got to pitch your services, your value to the company to become their vice president of the certain stuff, and then you're well on your way. You're well on your way. There's already been an outpouring of people applying, though, by the way, and the deadline, I believe, is about to pass. So you only have 2 or 3 more days to jump in there, oh man, and try to be on this. There's so many jokes I'm avoiding making, by the way. There's so many, and I'm just trying not to make any. It makes sense, though, because there's a lot of opinions out here as to whether or not it's valuable, according to this article, to consider this alternative. And it's obviously popular in a lot of other places. So here in the United States, Tushy hopes that by hiring a vice president of their service and having them take a 3-month sabbatical where they do a whole lot of testing is going to help make their product a lot better. The VP will also be tasked with interviewing others about their habits. So not only do you make sure to do a lot of research on your own, you're going to have to do some interviews. You test the products, like I said, and you produce a video for social media that kind of summarizes the entire experience. I will agree with this. After reading through this whole thing, it absolutely would stand out on your resume. And just the fact that video of you going through this whole experience would exist out there in the world, I think that would both be maybe a positive and a negative, depending on the things that you discover in that world. But it's a very open door policy, according to the company themselves. Oh, my. All right. Craig Collins filling in on the Chad Benson Show.
This is the Chad Benson Show.